Incomplete narratives. If I can speak, I have had too much caffeine. Look at this. So, and this is a mistake, by the way. I'm drinking coffee this late. What am I thinking? But this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about narratives. And why are they so important? Well, they're very important because narratives are how our brain understands the world. We build things in narratives. Why? Because it's too hard to think about every detail. But if we think about a story, if we think about a series of causes and effects and causes, then we can remember a whole lot of stuff without having to remember every detail. We kind of remember the story, and then by remembering the story, we start to recall more and more detail, as opposed to having a bunch of detail and not having a story, or having a bunch of detail that then fits into a story. So, and why is this important, and why is this an application? Well, it's important for positioning. And again, so here's the book, positiontowin.com, if you wanted to see what's going on with that. I'm going to give you guys some updates on this later. So this is important in positioning because it is the narrative, it is the structure around that we put a label on, and then by putting a label, now we draw a circle or a box around that, and then we don't have to think about all the detail, and the detail is not important. Now, this is good if we have actually good fleshed out narratives, complete narratives, and I'm going to talk about what that is. But this is bad, very bad, when we have incomplete narratives, when we only see one side of things, okay? So let's talk about a complete narrative. What is a complete narrative? A complete narrative is a spectrum. It's a spectrum between, let's say, between good and between bad, let's say, right? But it has the full extent of it, all right? Everything is taken into consideration. So if you think about a story, this could be a movie, this could be something you tell yourself about yourself, this could be the way that you conceptualize somebody, right? Oh man, I don't really like her, I don't really like him, you know. Then you already kind of drew a box around that, right? Where there's a spectrum, where you have a sense of that whole thing, okay? So if you think about a story, let's pretend that a story has reality has certain sets of constituent elements, okay? And those constituent elements are like, if you were to boil everything down to certain things, you would end up with like certain things about reality that are just there. But what's important is that each one of those things, each one of those constituent elements, whatever that might be, does have or should have a positive and a negative and a full spectrum of both, okay? So this is why a good story, like a good movie or like a good myth, has, let's say, the hero, or has the protagonist, or it has that person that we all focus in, that we live through the story with, that has the good things and the bad things about them, right? Same thing with maybe the antagonist or their shadow, their opposite, also should have this complete thing. Now, if it doesn't, then it's like it's a bad story. Now, there are a lot of bad stories out there, unfortunately, and sometimes it's quite benign. It's like, well, it's just kind of silly, but sometimes not. Sometimes this could be really bad. And so I titled my video, well, where are all the toxic people at? Because I guess I'm tying it all together, everything I've been thinking about, with these posts that I've been seeing more and more lately, where people are talking about toxic people. Like, who are these toxic people? I don't see them. Where are they? I mean, don't get me wrong, I know what they mean, and I know that there are people who are negative, extremely negative, very depressed people out there, anxious people out there, people who are not taking any responsibility, resentful people, envious people, arrogant people, deceitful people, all those kinds of things. And there goes the idea that a person is not deceitful. A person acts deceitfully, or a person is not arrogant, a person is acting arrogant. You could hardly find anybody that will act one way 100% of the time. And if it's not 100% of the time, then what is, let's say, the 1%? Yes, just to give the devil its due. Or maybe the 40% or the 30% of the time. What are they acting like? And it is a spectrum, should be a spectrum, right? Sometimes, even if in the most negative, in the most deceitful, in the most arrogant and envious, resentful people in the world, they might have moments of grace. They might have moments of thankfulness. They might have moments of assuming responsibility. So it's not good to put everybody or to put somebody in a box like that. Okay? Because that's an incomplete narrative. Alright, so let's talk about an incomplete narrative. The incomplete narrative is where you take one side of that constituent element and then you completely ignore the other side. So it's not like you include it here, like this is the negative side and you also talk about it, but like you take it out completely. This is gone. Okay? And you only consider this, right? And then in the worst of cases, in the most pathological of cases, you place yourself here in the good side, and then you place everybody that you don't like here in this side. Okay? So why is this bad? This is bad because when you put somebody in an incomplete narrative where they're only bad. So when you talk about toxic people, it's like that defines them, right? They're just toxic and like you need to get away from them. Now I understand what people mean when they say, look, you got to get away from people who are not good for you. Fair enough. But it is more nuanced than this. Why? Because if you don't take this into account, this might be important. You actually might need to pay attention to something that is going on. So I'll give you an example. An incomplete narrative in its most benign, most kind of bland version of an incomplete narrative is a pitch. It's like a sales pitch. When somebody's trying to sell you something, they're interested in telling you all the good things, all the reasons why you should definitely take action, definitely purchase, right? But they won't tell you the reasons why this might not be a good idea. They'll just kind of obviate those things. It's not important, okay? Now that's the most benign, all right? And in this most pathological, most dangerous, this can turn not only psychological in the sense of being a toxic person or you're a sociopath, but also it could turn political, which it gets very dangerous, very, very dangerous. Because most of the time, again, there's a spectrum, right? Even if it was Hitler himself, Hitler could say something that is actually true. And there's the point. So when you say that somebody's toxic, right? And let's say this is the toxic person right here. He's toxic right there. So I put that box around them. And by putting that box around them and saying that they're toxic, then I get to completely ignore everything they have to say. Right? And they're just done, right? They have no say. There's nothing that they can do. Boom, that's it. Now, this is what a narrative does. A narrative builds a pattern that fills in all the details for you. So when the narrative is complete, it's great because you can have all these paths that you navigate with and that you know that you have to navigate. So when a narrative is complete, you might know that sometimes your friends may be negative. Sometimes they may be not helpful, right? But also that many times whatever feedback they give you actually constitutes some kind of help, some kind of outside point of view which may be helpful. And it is your job to, let's use orange. It is your job to navigate through these, right? As opposed to an incomplete narrative where you don't navigate, you figure out who's on your side, who is not toxic, who's not a sociopath, right? And then everybody else is like, well, I just place them there, and then I don't have to listen to anything they say, right? And again, this is very dangerous because you are negating a whole side of the spectrum, and not realizing that, look, there aren't toxic people and non-toxic people. There are, all of us have sides of us who are, let's, for lack of a better word, toxic or not helpful. We don't take enough responsibility. There are parts of us that don't take enough responsibility. There are parts of us that don't that deceive ourselves. We tell lies to ourselves. Well, many times to shield us from a certain amount of reality, let's say. There are parts of ourselves that are arrogant. There are parts of ourselves that are envious. There are part of ourselves, all those things, right? That is, let's say, the psychological level of analysis of whatever person you're talking about, including you. And one of the ways in which we know, or we can get some feedback about that, perhaps we're lying to ourselves, perhaps we're being envious, perhaps we're being arrogant, perhaps we're being deceitful, is by listening to other people. Maybe you've been listening to somebody's bad side. When somebody, just goes off of you, and you might say, hey, you might be tempted and go, hey, I'm gonna stick you in the toxic category, so I don't ever have to consider you. Rather, this should give you a clue of, wait a minute, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to adapt. Maybe there's some feedback. And this is why I just think this is so pathological and not helpful, not good. And again, we live in a world that we're compartmentalizing, right? We look at a news feed that only tells us what we want to hear, right? And this is just bad. This is terrible, okay? Now, let me give you an example here how you could pitch, because you might say, well, Gabe, I want to pitch. I want to convince people of things. Well, yeah. One of the best ways that I know how to pitch is I tell people, look, these guys down here, they're not telling you the bad things. Let me tell you the bad things. Let me tell you the things that could happen. Let me give you the full spectrum of let's say, the structure of reality and whatever it is that we're talking about. Maybe it's just a business strategy, right? And so the guys that are trying to sell the latest and greatest product, whatever that might be, they're over here. They're saying, oh, it's all good. It's all good. It's great. It's just all going to be fine. But I say, well, it could be fine, but here are the risks involved. And you should then hire, for example, me, somebody that can navigate through both extremes, who understands all the potential, but also understands all the downsides, and is ready to jump in with you. That's a completely different idea. Now, that's a complete pitch. That is, for me, that's not pathological. That's not narcissistic. Somebody called this the sociopath business model, right? When you tell people, oh, look, all the money you're gonna make. Oh, it's all gonna be great. Man, you're gonna be able to retire at 35. I had a friend, I remember he got into an MLM years and years ago. We were just out of high school, and he was trying to get this going, right? He was sold in the idea. He was sold in the incomplete narrative of the MLM, where like it's all gonna be good. I recently had somebody that I used to be friends on Facebook. I told her, I can't believe you're falling for this crap of an MLM. And her friends commented and laughed at me, and then eventually she deleted me. So it's like, again, an incomplete narrative expressed in social media, which I'm not gonna hear the naysayers. And there's a big flood of people say, don't listen to the naysayers. I also got banned from a couple of groups for being a negative naysayer. But it's a difference between being a negative naysayer and somebody who says, look, this could be good and this could be bad and this is what it looks like. Okay? And it is our responsibility to go with our eyes open and understand the good, all the great things that can happen, but also understand all the bad things that can happen. And it is our responsibility. So in the best case scenario, if we take an incomplete narrative, we might go into a decision that, again, at best, we don't know exactly what could happen. At best. And at worst, we might be closing ourselves off to the possibility of feedback. We might be closing ourselves off to the possibility of learning. We might be closing ourselves off to the possibility of progress, because actually what might be a toxic person might be somebody that might be helpful for you. If what makes you think, and this is kind of echoes the post that I did earlier in the day, what makes you think that you would listen to somebody who's telling you the truth about something. What makes you think that? You see, everybody wants to think that, well, if I was around and the Nazis would have come around, I would have told them to go to hell or something. I would have told them I would never follow them. Well, everybody wants to think that, but the statistical likelihood of that happening is like almost zero. Most people with maybe some sense, maybe the standard people, the average person in Germany went right along, and it wasn't until much later that he was like, wow, this is really getting out of hand. Well, so those are some of the dangers of an incomplete narrative and of putting people in boxes. Now, I understand why we put people in boxes. Okay, I am the co-author of the modern book on positioning, for sure. I understand that labels give us. They are the label of the narrative. They are the label of the character. They're the label of the category that allows me to take up all these details without remembering the detail. And I just kind of use it. But what if you mislabel something? And there is the danger. And this is why this becomes very pathological and dangerous. Because political parties use this all the time. They build mostly incomplete narratives. I don't know any political movement that has ever embraced a whole narrative. They build incomplete narratives, and then they make people battle between the two sides, even though it is both sides already, right? A person is not just good, and a person is not just bad, even if it's like the worst person in the world, right? Okay, let's pretend it's the worst person in the world, but the worst person in the world tells you, look, the earth is round. It doesn't make his statement untrue, with all due respect to flat earthers. So the fact is that whatever constituent element of reality you are thinking about, whether it's a person, whether it's time, whether it's reality, the different elements of reality, the different kinds of tensions, right? Between on one side, let's say resentment, right? Talking psychologically, and then on the other side, arrogance, right? They're kind of like the both sides, right? So resentment is when you're kind of like you gave up because you feel like you'll never get what you think you kind of honestly deserve, right? And then arrogance is like where you are so full of yourself that you don't need anybody else because you're it, right? But it's actually kind of interesting that both of those opposites kind of end up in the same place, right? You could be so arrogant, full of yourself that you end up leaving everybody else, or you could be so resentful and envious that you kind of leave it. And so both ways sort of abdicate that responsibility, right? And I don't mean to get philosophical and psychological, because all this applies to anything you're thinking about, right? If somebody offers you a business venture, it can't be, well, you're gonna make all this money and everything is gonna be great, and we'll be dancing around the campfire. Okay, well, what is the downside? Somebody might say, well, there are no downsides. So every time somebody describes to you anything, any story, even when you describe something to yourself, always ask yourself, what is the other side? Can I see both sides? And because it moves in a spectrum. Now, this is more complicated because it's going to give you some cognitive dissonance. You're not going to want to you're not going to want to do this, right? It's easier to put a label on somebody. It's easier to say, look, that person's a sociopath, and that person needs to be out of my life because it's not helpful. Okay? Maybe it is. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen. No, this doesn't happen. I'm not saying that the decision for you to grab one individual and to say, this is not helpful for me, I'm going to move on, doesn't happen, and it's not helpful. I've done it. I have people that actually should be very close to me, but are not. So I've done it, right? But I do it with the conscious knowledge, knowing, and I'm not saying I do this perfectly because I don't at all. This is also me talking about myself. But I've done it knowing that maybe I am wrong. right? And then I reevaluate that decision. I put it back on the table, right? Which is tiresome, but it's important, because what if you're wrong? What if it's not, there's just not one side to one person, not just the positive or maybe the negative. Oh, this also happens in the positive. So an incomplete narrative can be like this, which is everybody, those people in that group or that pitch or that idea or that whatever is bad. It's all bad. It's all bad, right? Or it could be like this person or this deal or this religion or this idea or book or concept or product or company. It's all good. It's all good, right? So that this could be like the halo effect. Have you ever heard of the halo effect? The halo effect is where we attribute good qualities to somebody because they have one maybe overwhelmed. So if somebody it's tall and good looking, we give them all these other qualities. We say, oh, and also they're smart, and they're capable, and they're hard work, even though maybe they may not be, right? But so this is the halo effect, in which, again, for the sake of practicality, for the sake of shortcuts, for the sake of perception, for the sake of positioning, we say, okay, is it here or is it there? But it's not, okay? So are there some places where it's okay to have an incomplete narrative? Yeah. Well, I'm not saying it's okay, but it's maybe not essential that we figure this out for everything, right? As a matter of fact, culture, the reason that the culturization process is important, the reason that we have a civilization, the reason that we are brought up and then we start learning and imitating things, right? We have procedural memory, and then we have episodic memory, and then we have semantic memory, right? In other words, we have, at first we imitate, right? And then we play certain acts that people do, like going to the bank. And that going to the bank is like an act. It's like a little scene in our lives where we know what we're doing. We get up, we take a shower, we do all these kinds of procedures in sort of an episode, right? Episodic memory, and then eventually we get to semantic memory where we can even write it down. We can articulate it. We can tell somebody, look, this is how I go to the bank. Okay, so the same thing is true when we're trying to. When we're trying to learn most of the things that we do in our lives, most of the time we imitate, and then we play out episodes, and then we can articulate or tell people about it or not. But it doesn't matter. We have that encapsulated. But by and large, a lot of those decisions, a lot of that, let's say, narrative has been worked out for us in advance. Okay? Because if it wasn't, there's no way, there's not enough time for us to come up with new procedures for everything and to decide what the spectrum is and what the narrative is for every little thing that we do. Maybe this gets too complicated the way I'm talking about it, but this is actually the way it works in our brain. So this is very interesting when people tell you, well, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in God. It's like, well, okay, I understand what they mean when they say that, but and I'm not saying you should believe in God either. What I'm saying is that we all believe in things, and we have to believe in things because there are always more things that we don't know, and there's not enough time in our lifetime to come up with every procedure, with every narrative, for every procedural and episodic and semantic thing that we do. It's impossible. It's impossible. We start off imitating other people. And this is good. As a matter of fact, in culture, when we see other people, one of the ways that we like or dislike somebody is we observe them and we kind of get a feel for how much they are imitating us, right? And we do this subconsciously. Have you ever been in a conversation where, this is a good tip for us guys, and girls too, obviously, when you're talking and then you kind of lean into somebody and then that person leans into you, right? Which, by the way, we're going to talk about a lot in Las Vegas in October 20th and 23rd. When that happens, there's a communication. Now, if you're conscious of it, you can use it. You can go, oh, wow, this person's really listening, is really partaking on what's going on. But we do this most of the time subconsciously. We're working these things out, and the more somebody imitates us, we kind of feel good. We go to a restaurant, and a restaurant has tables, and the tables have chairs, and the chairs are arranged a certain way. Now just watch. Next time, you grab a chair and put it in the middle of a bunch of tables and sit down and see if everybody around you starts looking around like, what are you doing? Why? Because the room is already telling you how to behave. It's already saying, this is how we play the scene out. Right? So at first you walk in, and maybe it's a restaurant you've never been, and you walk in and you go, okay, well, how does it work? Okay, then you see the tables, everything kind of tells you. The waiter might even be helpful and smart enough to reduce a lot of that uncertainty and kind of show you the way. It kind of sits you down, pulls the chair out, pulls it in. Now you're all good, puts the napkin over you. Man, you're feeling good. All of a sudden, everybody's in uniform, in unison, right? And so that makes the brain relax, because everything starts to flow and flow predictably, even though we live in an incredibly unpredictable world. And so that is exactly the point. The point is that these procedural things that we imitate are what allow us to be socialized, to be a human in the world. Now, if you're out in the street in, let's say, downtown LA, and you see this person who's homeless and they look like they're lost, and you could see that there's a million demons and crazy things happening in their head, the first thing you do, you don't go up to them and you go, hey, so what's going on? Let me help you. Like, that's like, wow, I don't know what is going on there. I'm gonna go this way. Right? Because that person is acting all procedurally, episodically, in a way that is unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if this guy has a knife. You don't know what's going on, and so you have an emotional reaction to that. So this is why narratives are important, and not only narratives, but the awareness of narratives, the awareness of a complete narrative. So when somebody tells you, and I hate when either side does this in politics, whether it's these guys or those guys. So like you'll see these memes that are ridiculing people who want gun control. Now I think this is a much more complicated discussion, but it's not going to help anybody to ridicule any of the sides. It does not helpful, because what is going on is, again, a lot of ridicule is, let's take this side out and let's talk about this and see how funny it is, or let's do it the other way around and look at all the great things that they go, right? They're just beautiful, right? So when we're in love, this is what happens, right? And so infatuation, let's say, is this one, right? But it was somebody very special to me that taught me, look, you can't just take the good sides and not take the bad. And she was right? And I wasn't really, obviously intellectually, I wasn't doing that, but emotionally I was. I was like, I wanted my incomplete narrative, so that kind of let predictability and gave me control, I guess. And so I wanted, hey, I want the good girl, right? I don't want the bad girl. It's like, well, actually, the girls, have all sides, and especially, deep, intelligent, complicated creatures have this expanded version of them, and actually it's what kind of makes it fascinating and great and fun, right? So, and maybe not fun, joyous, I think is better. Deep, meaningful. I like that, meaningful. So, because it's got the full spectrum of things, as opposed to, no, I don't like him, I don't like her, I don't like, that employee, I don't like that idea, I don't like that proposal, I don't like that, and we make this judgment call, because as soon as we put this in the box of incomplete, of there, then we're done. This guy, Rory Sutherland, he is he's vice president of Ogilvy, UK. And he said a sentence that I really liked. He says, the more ways in which you can look at something, the richer you are. The more ways in which you can look at something, the richer you are. And I agree with that. I agree. And I think that the ultimate way to look at something, at any constituent element, whether it's an idea, whether it's a plan, whether it's a day, whether it's a person, is by understanding the full spectrum. One of my favorite exercises, mental exercises, is to find out, okay, where's the limit here, right? Where's the limit here, right? And so many times, if you argue with me ever, I'll take this all the way to the extreme until you tell me, okay, come on, Gabe. I mean, are you serious? No. Yes, I'm being serious. But what I want to know where the line is, where you think the line is. Because now if we know the line on this side, okay, let's draw the line over here. And there's two lines, always two lines. And then we can get a more nuanced sense of where we have to play. So I had a philosophy teacher years ago, and he was very atheist. He used to say that I'm very atheist and all that. And so at that time, I guess I was in college a while ago now, and people would be like, oh my God, he's an atheist. But anyways, and we in one of the classes I took with him, a smart guy. I liked him a lot. One of the things he taught was ethics. So he had an ethics class, which was absolutely fascinating. And he taught me a lot of great things. And one of the things that he always used to say is like, okay, well, so what is the red line of let's say badness, right? And his example was kind of funny in a cruel way, which was, well, you throw a baby in a pizza oven, right? Well, that's bad. It's almost like there's no context in which that's okay, right? So we could draw that line, okay? But it's the good is harder to define. But that's like the ultimate narrative, right? The ultimate narrative is what is good and what is bad, all right? So I'm not gonna go into that. And that's that's the moral level of analysis. But that's like I said, is the ultimate, right? Is the one that would define everything, which is very difficult to do, namely. And when people have different concepts of that, that's when you have wars and you have big conflicts, right? Where this doesn't match. So, in summary, and I'm going to do some announcements. In summary, a complete narrative is where you understand that every constituent element of, let's say, your reality, every person in your life has some good things about them and some bad things about them. And it is your job to see where they fit at the moment that they fit in your life. That's it. That's a complete narrative, and that's something that we need to not only know, but again, for me, the idea here is to be aware that our brain structures it this way, okay? And I guess I could have started the video, and in my head, I had started the video like that, which was the brain is a pattern matching, pattern recognition, pattern detection machine. And that's literally what the brain does. As a matter of fact, people who have excess dopamine, or dopamine action, or dopamine activity, let's say, in the brain, tend to be schizophrenic. That's the schizophrenia side of the spectrum, right? They have they do so much pattern recognition that they see people where there are no people. They hear people when there's nothing to hear, and they see patterns, right? Like most schizophrenics, they feel like the FBI, the CIA, Secret Service, that they're after everything, and then also people who tend to believe in conspiracy theories and stuff like that. I'm not saying that there are crazy things that could possibly happen. I'm not gonna make that argument. But what I'm saying is that the more you see patterns, you might be able to see patterns where actually there's no pattern at all. Right? And on the other side of the spectrum, is it Alzheimer's or is it... Well, on the other side of the spectrum, basically, you don't see patterns where there's actually patterns, and you should pay attention, right? Because there's actually stuff going on. So you don't learn. You can't recognize when something happens again. You don't remember when something happens again. I think it is Alzheimer's. So that means that there's not enough dopamine activity, okay? So if you think about a pattern, and we perceive, because objects are really patterns. Objects are not really objects, which is probably one of the reasons why minimalistic music is so like intrinsically, it just kind of grabs you. So minimalistic music is like, if you go YouTube, Philip Glass Violin Concerto, second movement, or maybe more well known is Hans Zimmer, the Time track from the Inception, the soundtrack to Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, Christopher Nolan, that movie, which is a good movie. And so you see, basically that's like this little sections that repeat, and then he puts layers of stuff over the stuff that repeats, and that music just kind of grabs you. They use Hans Zimmer track for a lot of the different motivational speeches that people put online. Also, there's one that's kind of popular from Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then they put the track behind. It just kind of gives it that power, and it just kind of really grabs you. So and I think the reason why minimalistic music, and I've written a bunch of minimalistic stuff because I was totally a fan in college. I was totally a fan, and I didn't understand this, but now I think that's what's going on. It really kind of captures you, and I think it captures you because it most closely resembles reality. It's like a metaphor of reality, because like if you think about an object, it's not just an object, it's like an object through time. So it's like a pattern, right? Because eventually, for example, an apple ceases to be an apple eventually, right? It disintegrates, it disappears, right? So the idea of an apple is not the same thing as an apple. Maybe too philosophical, but anyways, so if you think about patterns, and if you think about objects being as patterns, and if you think about characters, persons, ideas being patterns, and you put them all together, that's the narrative. And as long as the patterns have every element, every person, every object has the full spectrum, and you can clearly move an object from the good to the bad, right? You can grab an apple and say, well, an apple, let's say in this dream, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And then these other extreme, well, actually, you need to eat something more than just apples, and maybe apples are not that great, especially because most apples have been selected to be sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, and that's all sugar is probably not that great for you. Then you have the full elements, and then you have every character, every part of the narrative on a full spectrum. Then you have something, and this is why myth is important. Right? And the myth and stories, really well-built stories and foundational stories of let's say Western civilization, you have this full spectrum. Like things could be really good, but also things could be really bad. So let's not just pretend that things are going to be all great and good. Let's all plan for the bad times, right? Let's when bad times happen, right? We put this quote in the book, which I like, which is dig the well before you're thirsty, right? So maybe you will get thirsty, you might need a well, let's build it, right? As opposed to, no, it's always going to be great, we don't need no well until you need one, and then you're done. So this is very important because, and I'll close because there's no better way to close than this. And it's a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, where he says that the line between good and evil, so he says something like, if evil people would be over there and then good people over here, then we could just grab all the evil people, in this case, all the toxic people, all the sociopaths, all the people, all the undesirable people that we don't want, and we put them over there, we destroy them, we get rid of them, and we're done. And we just stay here nice and healthy because we're the good people. Well, he says, if all the evil people would be one place, we could grab them and destroy them. But he says, but the line between good and evil is a line that runs through the middle of every man and woman's heart. So this is the complete narrative. The complete narrative is to understand that there are great things about us, and there are great things about our friends, and there are great things about our relatives, there are great things about our maybe a special person, our friends, our coworkers, our jobs, our economy, our even government. Look at that. I'm saying that. Are there actual good things? Yeah, you can find good things. You can find them. But there are also bad things about our relatives, our friends, our special someone, and then it's our job to navigate through those, right? And then as long as we're taking responsibility for navigating between those two, and acknowledging the good in somebody, and acknowledging the good of an idea, or maybe the fact that you don't even know. Like I'm in charge of a lot of projects, and now I see it from my point of view, where I used to be the guy that proposed ideas, right? Now, I have, for example, Sandra, who's our marketing manager, and she says, hey Gabe, I have this idea, and I want to be very careful in taking that idea and actually analyzing it and thinking, yeah, I think that could be a good idea, as opposed to, well, I didn't think about that idea, so since I didn't think about it, it must be bad. No, wait, you didn't think about it, but maybe it's good, or maybe you don't know if it's good or bad, right? Many times that's what happens. But just because she said it and not you, not great, amazing you, doesn't mean it's wrong. And I have to really stop and kind of really, okay, yeah, I actually don't know. Maybe the idea even doesn't sound great to me, but it doesn't matter. It falls on the spectrum. If I know and understand that there's a completeness about it, as opposed to, no, there's an incompleteness about it. Now, why do people fall into here again? Because this is easier. This is much easier. It reduces the flexibility, reduces the possibility of stuff. And I believe there are some people who are, especially who are high in conscientiousness and the orderliness dimension, that love to, figure this out and go, okay, here are the guys, here are the people, those are that's my enemy, and here are my friends, and then we battle and we fight. But it's never like this, right? The human heart, we all have good things about us. So the toxic people, where are the toxic people? Well, they're everywhere, and they're inside of you. They're inside of me. They're inside of us. So we do well by taking responsibility for ourselves, and really examine it. And I just don't see the need. I don't see the need to say, well, you have a toxic relationship. What does that even mean? That is not helpful. It is not helpful for the people in the relationship. I'm not saying stay in the relationship, but I'm saying consider the full spectrum and really start working things out, and then make a decision. Not just put the other person on the other team, or put it in your team for that matter, and say, well, I'm stuck with them because they're on my team. No, it's more nuanced than that. And are you gonna take responsibility and actually figure it out? I think it's important. I think it's worthwhile. I think you might even learn. Who knows? All right, that's it. Now, couple of housekeeping things. We're having a webinar tomorrow. I'm gonna share the link on my newsfeed. We're having a webinar about our event. We have an event called Shred Your Reality. Shred Your Reality is going to be a 4-day event where it's gonna be great. We're gonna have 4 distinct days, and some people are just coming for one day. Some people are coming for 2. Some people are coming for 3, and some people are coming for all 4. Where we're gonna talk about all these things in positioning. I'm probably not gonna get as philosophical as this, but I will talk about some of these things as they relate to business. And if you're there, we'll talk about specifically how these kinds of positioning things relate to your situation specifically. So this is all very kind of philosophical and strategic, right? Because, and again, I always end up talking about relationships and business, and I know for a lot of people those things have nothing in common, but from the strategic point of view, they have everything in common. As a matter of fact, a business is much easier than a friendship, like 1 billion times easier, and let alone a relationship. That's like crazy stuff. So we're gonna be talking about that. Also, we're gonna have copies of the final product of Most Businesses Fail in the First 5 Minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it, which is the modern book on positioning. So we're gonna have copies of that at the event. So if you're there, you're gonna get some. Also, if you want to know more about the event, if you want to listen to us in the podcast, if you want to be notified for the official book release, then just need to go to positiontowinbook.com. Positiontowinbook.com. You can enter your email. You'll get notified about the official release. You can also, there's a link for the podcast. You can listen to the podcast where we talk about, we do more business stuff. You will always hear me go kind of on a, quasi-philosophical, psychological tangent. I like it. I think if we understand that at that deeper level, then the level of business, let's say the business reality, is much easier. It's a simplified version of this. Also, I believe that mostly in business, in marketing campaigns, what a lot of programs that I've seen, MBAs, business books, and I have a ton of business books, and I've read them all, by the way, or all the ones that I have, that is, not all business books, but all the ones that I have. It approaches things from the academic, a lot of times from the academic point of view. Well, people don't necessarily think about things and then act. We feel about things and then think and then justify with logic the way we act. That's actually what happens. So, and as a matter of fact, I think one of the things that makes John's and my approach different in our consultancy, in writing the book, and all that, in the podcast, and all the different things that we do, is that it is the intersection between business and marketing and psychology, right? We take into account and we take it as light posts, as guideposts, as fundamental principles of human psychology, of human feelings, of human nature. And these things sure heck not gonna change, right? A lot of things are gonna change, but those are not gonna change. So anyways, those are the announcements, and I know this has been a long one, but I feel like talking, and I had a bunch of caffeine, so I'll see you guys on the next one.